Number: Japanese soldiers were surprised when American corpsmen treated wounded civilians. Asterisk. April 1945. Okinawa. Asterisk. The air smells of sulfur and salt, mixed with the acrid burn of cordite that clings to every surface like a second skin. In a ravaged village on the southern edge of the island, beneath the skeletal remains of a Shinto gate, a Japanese soldier watches through the shattered wall of what was once a schoolhouse. His uniform is torn, caked with coral dust and dried blood. He has not eaten in 3 days. In his trembling hands, he clutches a photograph, a wife, a daughter, smiling in a garden he will never see again. But his eyes are fixed on something far more impossible than survival. An American medic, kneeling in the mud, wrapping the shattered leg of an old Okinawan woman who cannot stop weeping. This moment quiet, almost invisible against the thunder of artillery exchanges along the Shuri line, would rupture something fundamental in the soldier's understanding of war, of enemies, of what men become when ideology meets flesh and suffering. For months, he had been told that the Americans were demons in human form, beasts without honor who would desecrate the living and defile the dead. The Imperial Command had distributed pamphlets warning that American forces committed unspeakable atrocities, that civilians would be violated, tortured, exterminated. Japanese military doctrine, steeped in the Bushido Code and twisted by ultranationalist fervor, had prepared soldiers to fight to the death not only to preserve honor, but to protect the innocent from a monstrous enemy. And yet here, in the smoking ruin of a village where Japanese forces had ordered civilians to commit mass suicide rather than face capture, an American corpsman was saving lives. The contradiction was not theoretical. It was immediate, undeniable, documented in the stunned faces of soldiers who surrendered in those final weeks and in the testimonies collected by American intelligence officers in the months that followed. Japanese combatants, conditioned to expect brutality, encountered something their training had rendered unimaginable: mercy as military protocol. The U.S. Navy corpsmen and Army medics attached to infantry units carried a standing order that defied the logic of total war: treat all wounded, regardless of uniform or allegiance. This was not sentimentality. It was doctrine, codified in field manuals and reinforced through training that emphasized the Geneva Conventions, even when the enemy had not signed them. American forces on Okinawa treated over 12,000 civilian casualties during the campaign, despite being under constant fire, despite losing medics to sniper rounds and artillery, despite the fact that Japanese forces often used civilian areas as defensive positions. The Japanese soldier in the schoolhouse had expected conquest. He had been told that the American way of war was mechanized annihilation, a grinding industrial process devoid of humanity. What he witnessed instead was abundance repurposed, not merely of material, though the mountains of plasma, sulfa powder, and morphine syrettes were staggering to men whose own medical supplies had dwindled to rice paper, bandages, and sake for anesthetic, but abundance of principle. Each medic carried a canvas bag marked with a red cross, and inside were not just instruments of healing, but a choice codified into doctrine, that even in the chaos of extermination, life retained value regardless of nationality. The old woman whose leg the corpsman was splinting had been injured by American shelling. The medic knew this. He treated her anyway, slowly, methodically, speaking words she could not understand in a tone that transcended language. Historical records from the Battle of Okinawa reveal the scale of this cognitive dissonance. Interrogation reports from captured Japanese soldiers consistently expressed shock at the treatment of prisoners and civilians. One officer, captured near Naha, told his interrogators that he had ordered his men to kill themselves rather than endure the torture he assumed awaited them, only to be given water, food, and medical care within an hour of surrender. Another soldier, wounded and left for dead by retreating forces, wrote in a diary recovered after the war that an American medic had carried him half a mile under fire to an aid station, an act so incomprehensible within his framework of honor and expectation that he questioned whether he had died and entered some inexplicable afterlife. The symbolic weight of that canvas medic bag, stained, patched, perpetually half open, became a recurring image in the testimonies of those who survived. It represented not just medical supplies, but the philosophical infrastructure of a nation that could wage industrial war while simultaneously maintaining vast logistical networks dedicated to preserving life, even enemy life. Japanese military medicine, by contrast, had collapsed under the weight of attrition and ideology. Soldiers were expected to die for the emperor. Care for the wounded was often seen as a dangerous distraction from total commitment. The contrast was not merely material, but existential. What changed in that schoolhouse, in that instant of watching an enemy save a life he could have ignored, was not loyalty or love of nation. Those bonds ran too deep, were too entangled with identity and sacrifice. What changed was the possibility of understanding the war as something other than a cosmic struggle between light and darkness. The American corpsman, exhausted, covered in the blood of 3 nations, did not speak of ideology as he worked. He did not invoke freedom or democracy. He simply acted according to a principle so embedded in his training that it had become reflex. Suffering demands response, regardless of whose suffering it is. In the weeks after Okinawa fell, American forces established civilian aid stations across the island, treating over 50,000 Okinawan refugees for wounds, malnutrition, and disease. Japanese soldiers, emerging from caves and spider holes, watched this occupation unfold with a confusion that bordered on grief. They had been prepared to witness horror. Instead, they witnessed something far more disorienting, a demonstration that power and mercy were not mutually exclusive, that abundance could be directed toward healing rather than solely toward destruction. The photograph in the soldier's pocket, his wife, his daughter, had sustained him through months of fighting. But the image that would haunt him, that would recur in the long decades of silence and reconstruction that followed, was simpler: a muddy canvas bag, a pair of hands, and the impossible grace of an enemy who chose, in the midst of annihilation, to kneel in the ruins and bind wounds that were not his to heal.